Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. My business partner Corby McGordon is also with us today. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for helping you plan your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. As your business grows and scales and becomes more sellable and valuable, there's also going to be a growing need for effective leadership and management in ways that you haven't experienced in the past. And a key attribute we all know of effective leadership is communication. In his book, The Four Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive, Patrick Lencioni, he presents creating organizational clarity as one of those four obsessions, and organizational clarity being consisting of mission, vision, values, and strategy of the organization. He then cites over-communication or over-communicating organizational clarity as the third obsession, and suggests that healthy organizations align their staff or employees with the organizational clarity through repetition, simplicity, simple messaging, multiple mediums, which are available to us today, and what he would call cascading messages. And so as the founder or owner, you may not be the one doing this day to day at this point, but you need to make sure that someone's doing it in your pursuit of building a sellable business for a successful exit. And so this morning we're going to discuss a framework that can help you in this. And the framework is the title of the framework, or the name of the framework, is the Monroe Motivational Sequence. And we're very excited to have with us today our friend Vinca LaFleur to provide expert advice on the topic. Vinca is an executive director at West Wing Writers, a strategic communications firm founded by a team of presidential speechwriters based here in Washington, D.C. Vinca herself has worked in the White House as a foreign policy speechwriter for President Bill Clinton. She also ran her own strategic communications consultancy for a decade, working with high-profile leaders in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. And today, she and her West Wing Writers colleagues help CEOs, philanthropists, civic, cultural leaders, public servants, celebrities, and more to develop and share their stories with their audiences that matter most. And we also appreciate Vinca's perspective, not just because of all that expertise and experience, but also because as a business owner herself and the managing director of West Wing Writers, she has a deep understanding that she's gained over the years of everything it takes to build a valuable and sellable business. So we're really excited to have her with us today. She's a good friend. Vinca, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Pat and Corby and Walter. It's great to be here. Fan of the podcast and just really honored to be a part of it.
Well, Vinca, it's great to have you. Let me jump in with a question just to set the stage. In your experience as a business owner and an expert advisor to leaders of organizations, what are the most common leadership, communication, and messaging challenges that you see?
So it's interesting that you asked this, Corby. I mean, we're a strategic communications firm, and yet we have to think about it every day, too, in our own business internally. Pat, you set this up beautifully by talking about Lencioni's recommendations. I think one lesson I have had to learn over and over and over is just how important it is to over-communicate. You really need to be communicating with your team, not just regularly, but repeatedly, getting those messages out and speaking openly. Because people need time to absorb messages, and they need time to think through their questions and get their questions answered. And if you don't give them that time and that space and that room, then they are going to find themselves in a position where they're trying to connect the dots in their own mind and fill in the blanks for themselves. And that can lead to a lot of stress and unnecessary uncertainty and misimpressions for everyone involved. And I think these challenges are even more acute now in an era of hybrid work, remote work, post-COVID, where we're not all sitting in an office together 9 to 5 each day. And also because we now have multiple generations in the workplace together, people with different expectations, different understandings. And then lastly, because look, these are challenging times. This has been a very intense and difficult, fast-paced, unexpected, uncertain past 5+ years for this country and for the world. So people have a lot on their minds. When we're working with clients at West Wing Writers, whether we're working with them on a speech or an op-ed or anything else, the place we always start is, who is your audience? Who are you trying to reach? And really understanding that both demographically, are they men, are they women, are they American, international, are they young, are they old, all of that, but also an emotional screen. What is on their mind? How are they feeling right now? What are they excited about? What are they worried about? What are they proud of? What do they want you to know about them? What do they think about you? To really understand where they are, because when you have that kind of understanding, that allows you then to make sure that your messages, not just the content, but really the, the caliber of the communication, the frequency on which you are communicating, that you're on the same plane. So West Wing Writers, like many other businesses, and again, you mentioned this with Lencioni, we take advantage of every channel we have. We communicate, daily, hourly over Slack. We communicate weekly with a bulletin. We communicate monthly with a firm-wide Zoom. We communicate quarterly with a firm-wide all-staff meeting. But importantly, we have also, in a very intentional way, built in a lot more channels that enable us to listen, and to make sure that it isn't just, messages being developed from the top and then sent down, but that we are really understanding what people are thinking and saying from the bottom up. Their great ideas, information that they might have that is not necessarily making it to the executive directors of the company, so that we can make sure that we really understand where the team is, what's on their mind, again, the great ideas that they may have, so that our communication with them is responsive to them and reflective of, again, the great ideas and the great work and the great commitment that they are bringing to the work every day.
Yeah, and we know firsthand, Vinca, that you do a great job of this. And so I was listening to another podcast that you guested on, and I heard you speak of something that probably shamefully I'd never heard of before, the Monroe Motivational Sequence. And so I thought our listeners could very much benefit having you guest today and explain that sequence or that process or framework, because I think it's simple, it's repetitive, and it can help with to implement or execute on everything that you just mentioned in regard to the common challenges faced by leaders. So if you could just start to talk about it, and then we'll have some questions along the way.
Well, you shouldn't feel embarrassed that you had never heard of it. I had been a professional speechwriter for years before I heard of it. But one of the wonderful things about the sequence, Monroe's Motivated Sequence, is that I think we all actually intuitively understand it. A lot of the time we do it ourselves naturally without even realizing we're doing it. So Alan Monroe, who is the person who kind of named this framework, he was a professor at Purdue in the early part of the 20th century. And he was a communications professor. Purdue at the time and still had a fantastic engineering department. They were known for engineering. But the engineers who had all of these wonderful ideas and things that they were developing sometimes had trouble communicating them in a way that non-experts could get as excited about as they were. And so Professor Monroe, Alan Monroe, developed what he called the motivated sequence, which drew on psychology as well to help people understand how to communicate. And his insight was just that when you're trying to get people to do something, when you're trying to lead somebody to action, first, it's really important that they believe. You need to earn their belief first. And so the motivated sequence is really about persuasion. And it has 5 components. The first 3 sort of go in order. The second 2 can be flipped. So it's not like a very strict recipe that has to be followed step by step, but all the components are critical. So the first one is to get the audience's attention. No matter how great your idea is, if they're not paying attention to you, then it's just going to be lost. So the first thing is to get their attention. And there are a number of ways that you can do this if you're speaking publicly, but also, again, this could be in a written text as well. Maybe you open with a story, maybe with a rhetorical question, maybe with a shocking statistic, something that makes people think, wow, I never knew that, or I never thought of it that way before. Maybe with a joke. Sometimes we see this often in advertising. The way that they get our attention is all of a sudden it's a celebrity spokesman, and we're like, hey, what is Jennifer Aniston doing here, in this moment? So you want to get their attention first. The second step is what we sometimes call the problem. I think Monroe called it the need. But basically, you need to lay out what is wrong with the status quo. You need to give people an understanding that there is something that ought to be changed. And I think sometimes we're so excited as experts about our solution that we want to jump straight to the solution. But in order to lead people along this chain, first you have to make them understand that there is actually a problem. So spend some time talking about the need. What is wrong with the status quo? Then you get to your solution. How are we going to solve this problem? What is the answer that I have? And then the fourth step, which was one of the sort of the insights here, is what he called the vision. So you've described the problem, you've laid out the solution, but then you need to paint a picture for people of how will their lives be different if this solution is adopted. That's the positive vision. Or the negative vision. What would happen if they don't? What are the consequences of not acting? And the most obvious, famous example of this that comes to mind for Americans in our own oratorical history would be, I have a dream, the vision of what could happen, what could be if we took these steps. And then the last part is the call to action. So you want to send your audience away understanding what it is that they need to do next, understanding that there is something they can do, that there is a step they can take to bring all of this to fruition. And I will say that once you know these 5 steps and you have that framework in your head, you do start to notice it everywhere. I mean, a lot of advertising includes these 5 components. They get our attention, then they say, hey, there's a problem, then here's the solution, which is usually my product, my service. There's a vision, how your life is going to be better once you've bought my thing, and then the call to action, dial my number today, or visit our website today, or whatever the next step is. But this persuasive framework is a really great way to get started when you're, faced with that blank page. If you just write out those 5 components and then start filling in the blanks, it starts to come together more naturally.
Hey, Vinca, in step 4, have there been studies to say what's more powerful, showing somebody how things will be better versus how things could be horrible?
Yeah. Well, I will say, I imagine, Walter, that there are studies. I don't have any of those right at my fingertips, but I will say just sort of in my own experience, and I think we can all relate to this, when you're writing a speech for someone, when you're giving a speech, part of the goal for the speaker is you want the audience to like you. And it is easier to get people to like you if you are accentuating the positive than if you were, terrifying them. That said, and a good example of this actually where we see both messages at play, because both messages can be effective, and I think both are important. But I would, if I were going to use a negative message, I would also want to make sure that I was finding ways to pair it with the positive one too, because I think just the negative message can make people feel so scared and helpless that they just kind of turn off or tune out. But an example of this would be when we think about public health, and trying to get people to get a vaccination, or trying to get people to do their annual checkup, or any kind of preventive test. It is, you see sort of attempts on both sides, do this thing because it will make your life better and you'll be able to spend more time with your grandchildren and the people you love and so forth, versus if you don't do this, and then the scary picture of somebody in a hospital, with connected to tubes and things. You see both, and both can work. But I think ultimately accentuating the positive is probably a better way to get people on your side.
So, Vinca, as a business leader in the day-to-day, you're communicating a lot, and as Pat referred to, even, vision, you over communicate, etc. Is it something that is applied only in big reveals, big vision casting, or is it applied in weekly communication? And how would you do that?
Yeah. So you're talking about internally, in an organization. Um, so just what you said about, do we save it for the big reveal, or does it have to be ongoing? I think, again, this is just one of those lessons that sometimes it's hard for leaders, even who've been at it for a long time, to remember. It needs to be constant. It needs to be constant. And I think, when folks are sort of at the top of an organization or responsible for a division or a team, you have lots of information. You're thinking about things all the time. Like it's occupying all of your headspace. And so all the details are very familiar to you. But you need to remember that when you do that big reveal, for the audience, is the first time they may be hearing it. They haven't been thinking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so to just imagine something is like a one and done, it may feel to you like it's the culmination of all of these weeks of work. But for the people on the receiving end, it's just the beginning. And so there may be moments when there's an occasion for a big reveal, a product launch, or announcing a big change in an organization or something. But you really do have to either be teeing it up in advance, or after that communication moment, make sure that there are many, many, many opportunities for follow-up and reinforcement. And again, for letting people ask questions. Because you may think that you've communicated it beautifully and then find out after the fact that, something you thought was really clear was actually misunderstood. And you don't want to let that linger, again, especially now that we're hybrid and remote, because the information is very diffuse and, we spread it all very quickly with technology. And once a narrative has gotten sort of distorted, it can take a lot of time and energy to reshape it, to get it back on track. And so it is so much better for everyone, avoids a lot of stress for everyone, for your team, if you can make sure that everybody understands it from the start.
Yeah, well, you said in passing the fact that we're in such a virtual world now. Has that actually compounded the problem, therefore the need to be conscious of this?
I think so. It is also, on the plus side, will accentuate the positive. It has given us so many more tools. So it is much easier to be in touch with people in a very immediate way. And, in the old days, a company that had people all over the country, to get everybody together would have, taken an enormous amount of effort. Now we can talk to the whole team at once on, Slack or on a Zoom or something. So it's the technology on the one hand is a great asset. But it does also mean, yes, that information can just spread, and also it can spread in ways that management can't always see. And I think sometimes it can be tempting to think like, oh, if you're not hearing anything, that must mean that everything is great, But actually, it might mean, no, you're not hearing anything because there is a whole swirl of communication happening on some channel that you're not a part of. And you need to make sure that there is a way for it to get out of that channel and up to you, So I think a lot of the work for leaders in the modern workplace really is making sure that the communication is two-way, and just making sure constantly that there are channels, and that if, realistically, we're a pretty small company, as you know. I do know everybody in my company very well. But, for a larger organization, there's not going to be necessarily that direct, channel from all the way from the intern to the most senior person in the company. And so you do have to have built in at every level ways to ensure that communication is flowing in both directions. To keep everyone aligned.
Hey, Vinca, in the business setting, I'm just wondering, in like part 3, which you're laying out your solution, it seems like it would be kind of important to let people know that you've sought feedback from within the organization, and that you're not just saying, I'm the genius, here's what we're going to do from now on. Is that the section where you would talk about that, or would that be sooner, do you think?
It could certainly go there. That would be a logical place to do it if that's what the speech in question was about. Was talking about, okay, here's a problem that we've struggled with as a group, and here's what we're proposing, and here's how we got to this solution. So yes, it could be. I think I don't want to be too prescriptive about it, because I do truly believe that there isn't a perfect formula. There isn't a really rigid formula for anything. These are all frameworks that help us. And so depending on the organization or the issue, you would know best where it would fit. But that would be a very logical place. And if that's part of it, then I think it would be really important to include. And there are lots of ways you can do that. You can imagine doing it by sharing a story about, actually having gotten a great idea from another member of the team. You could quote somebody directly. You could call them out. You could remind people of something that we all did together. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. One of the lines that we use a lot in speech writing is show, don't tell. So instead of just saying, I surveyed the team to come up with these recommendations, you could say, I traveled to our office in McLean, and I met with the group there. And then I went up to New York and, heard great ideas from everybody, really to actually give it more context, make it more real. Because detail also is what people remember, and detail is what kind of engages the gears of the brain, and makes it sound less like something that anybody could say and more like something that only you could say.
Hey, Vinca, as managing director of West Wing and, business owner, how do you go about prioritizing what we're talking about here in relation to all your other responsibilities?
Well, there's never enough time to do as much as I want. I think this is probably a familiar sentiment among business owners. That there just aren't enough hours in the day to do everything as well as I wish I could. But I will just simply say that communication has to be one of the top priorities. Communication cannot be the thing that falls off the list, because it will come back to haunt you. And especially for a professional service firm like ours, the incredible men and women, the writers and thinkers and creatives that I work with every day, they are our firm. It is the talent that is the asset. And writing, strategic writing and thought partnership requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of vulnerability. Working with clients, it requires vulnerability on both sides to build that trust. But part of the job is we have to get a lot of feedback. We write drafts, we get edits. It's a personal, you're putting yourself out there. And so our team, it's very important to me that the team feel heard and seen and supported. And again, I've in a hybrid, in a remote work environment, that's harder to do. You can't do management by walking around if you're not all in the same place. So you need to be thinking constantly about, how can I show people that I know who they are, that I know what is on their mind, that I know what they're proud of, or I know what's keeping them up at night, and how can I show that I and the rest of the leadership team, that we are there for them. So communication, both in the day-to-day, and then in the broader sense, how do we make sure that people understand, here's what we're trying to achieve as an organization, here's how you fit into that, here's why your job is so important. Especially again, if you feel like you're sitting alone at your computer, in your home. How do we remind people constantly, you were part of a bigger thing, you were part of a bigger enterprise, and together we are achieving something important. And as you three know, West Wing Writers became employee owned last year. We did an ESOP, and so in this structure for our company, employee ownership, more than ever, it's really crucial that everybody not just understand that they have a stake, but that they feel it, and that they're proud, and that they feel valued for the important work they're doing.
I think Pat mentioned earlier where Lencioni says vision needs to be over communicated and 10 times what you think it does. And we're talking about a context of speeches, etc. Is it okay to almost repeat the message over and over, refine and hone the paradigm, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it does take more repetition than you think for the message to land. And even if you are able to get everybody together on, one Zoom or in one room and to deliver the message, and you think you've told everybody, like I told them all, but you don't know who in that room was preoccupied because their child was homesick that day, or who was thinking about a deadline and wasn't concentrating fully on what you were saying. So you need to repeat it. And then the honing, I think that kind of iteration, I mean, hopefully you're not making, you're not wildly swinging, but that sort of iteration and refinement comes from, again, this two-way dialogue, when you realize, okay, there were parts of this that maybe weren't fully understood, or, as often as not, the wonderful surprise is that the way that people respond helps you elevate your own messaging, that they see things in it that maybe you didn't even fully see or realize, and it helps you then describe it better. When you realize the impact that something has on the team, then you can fold that into when you're talking about it the next time, and try to inspire that even more.
Yeah, what comes to mind is the companies that have the mission, vision, values hanging on the wall.
Yeah,
but they don't function.
Never, right. Yeah.
What I hear you saying is the paradigm actually helps it really get meat on the bones of these things.
Yeah.
Because it's a dialogue, not a one-way communication.
Right.
Yeah. Very helpful.
Yeah. And Vinca, along the same lines, from your perspective, again, as a business owner and a managing director, and as someone who, to your point a minute ago, has successfully transferred the business to an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan. What do you think in regard to building transferable or sellable business value? If this isn't a priority, how do you think that goal is going to be impacted? Yeah, the goal of building a business that can be transferred either to sale to a third party or an ESOP or to employees. How do you think that goal could be impacted?
I mean, the way that I see it is just, is your business, is it just you? Is it just you in leadership, or is it actually an enterprise and a team? And I think that would be the difference, because if you have the whole team aligned, motivated, unified, excited about the work, and committed to one another as much as anything else, then you have that kind of sense of enterprise. And that we're all, in it together. And I think, again, I mean, the nature of the transaction that we did was very much actually with a mind to our own culture, of feeling like, our firm is our people. And so the success of the company is a reflection of all of the people who have been here over the years. But I think even if you were selling to a third party, to a strategic buyer, they are looking for the enterprise, and you need a committed group of people, and you need people, not just the leadership who can tell you what the company's all about and why we exist and what we're doing here, but all the way down the line. I think that's what enables the excitement and the longevity that the most successful companies are going to be able to bring.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think as Pat introduced you, he mentioned that, the people you and West Wing serve. And if I'm a business owner that owns, a $3 million, construction company with 10 staffers, does this still apply?
Yeah, absolutely. It still applies. It still applies. And, another thing that you could think about in that role, if you were the CEO or the president of that organization, is just try to put yourself in your employees' shoes, in your colleagues' shoes, and how you would feel if you were not hearing regularly from the leader of the team. All of this applies. It doesn't matter what size the organization is. I would say a team of 2 should be communicating regularly and making sure that they're on the same page. So it absolutely applies. It may, I mean, the level of formality for a very small organization, you may not be standing behind a podium, in a ballroom if you're a team of 10. And that is something too that West Wing Writers has experienced over the years. When I joined the company, there were 9 of us, and now there are closer to 35. And that's a very different feel. I mean, we're still a small company, but it is very different. 9 people could sit around one table, and when I started, we were all in one place. We were all here in Washington, D.C. It's a very different experience now, but it was always important.
Yeah. What comes to mind is just the fact that there are these 5 elements of it. I think as leaders, we can often go to, well, here's the solution, folks. But each aspect continually has to be touched on, refined, reinforced, shaped.
Yeah. And I think if you're thinking about internal culture or just, how things are going internally in an organization, Walter, thinking about the question that you had asked about where do you mention, that you've gotten input from others, it might be in the problem section as well, that you can really demonstrate as a leader that you hear what the team is saying, that you have your finger on the pulse, that you know how people feel. And then, and so here's how we're going to fix this together.
Yeah. So, listeners, we, based on our experience and not a few years of experience at this point, strongly believe that organizational clarity and an over-communicating organizational clarity is key to building a successful, a strong, sellable, transferable business, and then hence realizing a successful exit. We're all familiar with Drucker's quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And really, this has so much to do with culture and building it and strengthening it. And so the Monroe Motivated Sequence, listeners, learn it, live it, love it. Vinca, is there anything else this has been fantastic, as we knew it would be. Anything else that you feel like needs to be mentioned that we haven't asked you about or less?
The one thing that I would say is I would encourage your listeners and everybody to try, when you have to communicate, even in a company, with 10 people, try to write it down. Try to write down what it is that you're going to say. I don't mean necessarily that then you have to take it and, read a script, but try to write down what it is that you want to say, because I firmly believe that writing and thinking go hand in hand. And if you are struggling to express what it is that you're trying to say, that may be a sign that, you need to have another conversation with your team, because it isn't clear yet. If it isn't clear to you, you are not going to be able to make it clear to other people. And so going through that exercise of writing it down is really, really valuable and can be clarifying, again, because writing and thinking do go together. And that act of trying to get your thoughts out of your head and onto a page can, in fact, be revelatory for you as well.
Yeah, thanks, Vinca. Thanks for joining us. We knew it would be great, and it certainly has been. We're very grateful that you would take the time to join us here today. Is there anything that you'd like to, 2 things. Is there anything that you'd like to promote, you or West Wing? And then 2, if a listener wanted to contact you directly, how could they do that?
Well, we would love to hear from any of your listeners. So we can be found at westwingwriters.com. And our website has a page on it where you can contact us through the website. We respond immediately. So that's the best way to get in touch with us. And in terms of what to promote, I would just say that even though our name and our heritage very much ties back to having been presidential speechwriters, and clients often find us, they come to us first because of a speech, we actually do so much more than that as a strategic writing firm. We really see ourselves as being in the business of ideas, helping good people get good ideas out into the world to drive good things, good change. So I don't want people to think that, that this is just about speechwriting. We do everything as short as a tweet, as long as a book, op-eds, product launches, multi-speaker events, so much more than just a keynote speech. And the other thing that I would say is that we also have a publishing imprint called Disruption Books, which can be found at disruptionbooks.com. Disruption is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. It's what's called a hybrid independent publisher. And we're really able to offer authors, again, who have great ideas, but may not be a good fit or may not even want to pursue a trade publishing deal. It's a wonderful way to get a good idea out into the world quickly. And they just do fantastic work. And we've been really proud and privileged to work with some really high quality authors. So I'd recommend that as well. Excellent.
Fantastic. And the three of us, we can highly recommend Vinca and her team at West Wing Writers. They're just fantastic. They're highly competent and skilled and talented, but they're also just wonderful people to work with. And so listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Walter at 301-951-9090 and Corby and myself at 301-859-0860. If you've benefited from today's episode, please consider liking it, sharing it, and doing all that good stuff we do on social media. Thank you again for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial with Corby McGordon signing off.